A man in a threadbare coat stood in the middle of a crowded restaurant while the staff looked through him as if he were nothing. Nearly everyone turned away. Then a black woman, just off her shift, holding the last meal she could afford for her son, quietly broke her bread in half and handed it to the stranger. No one knew he was the CEO who owned that very restaurant. And no one guessed that half a loaf of bread would soon make powerful people pay. Why does a person with almost nothing still choose to share? The morning began the way most of Naomi Brooks's mornings began, with a small voice asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. "Mom," Jaden said, still tangled in his blanket, his 7-year-old face soft with sleep. "Can we have the chicken sandwiches tonight? The ones with the crispy part?" Naomi stood in the doorway of their small apartment kitchen, a chipped mug of coffee warming her hands, and she smiled the way mothers learn to smile when the answer is complicated. "We'll see, baby," she told him. "Let me look at what we've got, okay?" But she already knew what they had. She had counted it the night before the way she counted everything now. The refrigerator held half a carton of eggs, a heel of bread, and a jar of jelly scraped nearly to glass. On the front of it, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was the notice from the building manager, the one with the words "past due" printed in a red that seemed louder every time she walked by. Rent had a way of arriving faster than paychecks. That was a math she had never once been able to solve, no matter how many hours she worked. And she worked plenty. Mornings, she cleaned offices downtown, and evenings, she waited tables at a restaurant that belonged to a company far larger than the room it occupied, a place called Whitmore Hospitality that owned a chain of dining rooms across the state. The name meant nothing to most of the people who ate there. It meant a paycheck to Naomi, and a paycheck was a paycheck. Her husband had been gone a little over 2 years. People still told her they were sorry, and she still said thank you, and neither of them quite knew what to do with the words after that. What she had learned in those 2 years was quieter than grief. She had learned that no one was coming to save her. Not the landlord, not the world, not some kind stranger with an open hand. She had stopped waiting for that a long time ago. If something needed doing, she did it herself, and she did it without asking, because asking felt like admitting she couldn't. "I've got it," she would say to anyone who offered. "I've got it." She said it so often it had stopped being a sentence and become a wall. What she had not stopped doing was giving. It was a strange thing, and she never thought about it too hard, because thinking about it made it seem foolish. At the end of her shifts, when trays of untouched food were bound for the trash, she would quietly wrap what was still good and carry it out to the 2 or 3 men who slept near the alley behind the restaurant. She had done it that very evening on her way to clock out, the same as she did most evenings, wrapping food the company had already written off and setting it in the hands of men the world had stopped feeding. It cost her nothing but the risk of being seen. And being seen was exactly what her manager could not stand. His name was Marcus Denton, and he ran that dining room like a man guarding something. He had a smile for the customers and a different face for everyone else, and he had told Naomi more than once to stop feeding strays, as he called them, as though hunger were a kind of pest. She never argued. She just kept doing it. That too was a quiet wall. Far from that kitchen in a glass building where the reports about that kitchen eventually landed, a man named Daniel Whitmore was staring at a page of numbers that were too clean to be true. Daniel had built Whitmore Hospitality from a single leased storefront into something with his name on the door of 100 rooms. He was a man who believed in measurement. He believed that anything real could be counted, and anything that couldn't be counted was probably sentiment, and sentiment was expensive. He had said as much in a meeting that very week to a table of executives who nodded because he was paying them to nod. "Kindness is a luxury," he had told them, tapping the glossy folder in front of him. "We don't run on feelings, we run on figures. The figures are what keep the lights on." But these particular figures bothered him. Several restaurants were reporting food loss so low it defied cents waste numbers that read like poetry instead of accounting. Somewhere in his chain, something was being taken, and the reports were smiling at him while it happened. He did not yet know what, and he did not yet know who. He only knew that a man who trusts a report he cannot verify is a man being robbed politely. So Daniel decided to do the one thing his executives would have called beneath him. He would go and see for himself, not as the owner, as no one. He would put on an old coat and walk into one of his own dining rooms as the kind of man the world had trained itself not to look at, and he would watch how his people treated someone who could do nothing for them. There was a reason he chose that particular disguise, though he told no one, and would have denied it if asked. When he pulled the worn coat from the back of his closet, his hands slowed. He knew the weight of a coat like that. He knew what it was to be cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. He folded that knowledge away the way he folded away most things, and he went. The dining room was warm and loud when he stepped inside that evening, full of the clatter of plates and the low music of 100 conversations. Daniel moved to an empty spot near the counter and simply stood, and it was remarkable how quickly warmth could turn to frost. Marcus reached him first. "Sir," he said in a voice pitched to carry the word sharpened until it was the opposite of respect, "this isn't a shelter. You need to move along." Daniel said nothing. He wanted to see how far it would go. It went far. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice into something meant to be private and humiliating at once. "People are trying to eat," he said. "Nobody wants to look at you while they do it. Out, now before I call somebody." Around them, the noise of the room thinned. Diners looked, then looked away, choosing their plates over the man being pushed toward the door. A few of the staff watched too, and did nothing, because doing nothing was safer, and safe was a currency in that room. One of them did not look away. A young woman named Emily, barely a month into the job, stood frozen near the service station with a pitcher of water going warm in her hands. She had a manager's voice telling her the rules and a conscience telling her something else, and she was too new and too frightened to know which one to obey. So she stood there, caught between the two watching. And then Naomi came through the swinging door at the back, her apron already off, her shift already over. In her hands was a paper bag still warm, holding the one thing she had let herself buy, with what was left in her wallet, a chicken sandwich with the crispy part carried home like a promise made good. She had told herself the whole ride would be worth it just to watch Jaden's face when she said it in front of him. She saw the old man by the counter. She saw Marcus standing over him. And she saw most of all the way the room had decided this person did not count. Naomi did not think it through because kindness that has to be thought through usually talks itself out of happening. She crossed to the man, opened the bag, and broke the sandwich clean in two. "Here," she said, holding half of it out to him, her voice even and quiet and entirely without pity. "You look like you could use this more than I could right now." Daniel looked at the food in her hand and then at her face, and something in him went very still. "Your dinner," he said. It was not quite a question. "My son's a good waiter," Naomi answered, the corner of her mouth lifting. "He can hold on a little longer. He's done it before." Here was the thing Daniel would turn over in his mind for weeks afterward. He had stood in a room full of people who had everything to spare and had spared him nothing. And the one person who reached for him was the one who had the least to give, who was quite literally taking food from her own child's plate to do it. He, the man who had announced to a boardroom that kindness was a luxury, was being handed proof that the poorest person in the room could still afford it. The half sandwich sat warm in his hand, and for a moment the careful arithmetic he lived by had no answer at all. Cruelty rarely announces itself with a raised voice. More often it begins in something quieter, in a room deciding that a certain person is not worth the trouble of being seen. That decision, made 100 small times a day by people who would never call themselves cruel, was the very thing Daniel had come to measure. He had his measurement now, and it was not in any report. Marcus, however, was not finished, and what he did next told Daniel more than any spreadsheet ever could. "You have got to be kidding me," Marcus said, rounding on Naomi loud enough now that heads turned back toward them. "You're feeding him on the floor in front of customers." He gave a short, ugly laugh. "The broke feeding the broker. That's rich. That's really rich, Naomi." "He's hungry," Naomi said simply. "That's all." "What he is," Marcus shot back, "is a problem. And you're about to be one too." He stepped closer to her, and his voice dropped into something meaner and more knowing. "You think I don't remember all those little reports of yours? Miss Brooks so worried about the food we throw away. Always counting what goes in the trash, always in everybody's business but her own." His eyes narrowed. "Maybe you ought to spend less time worrying about the garbage and more time worrying about your job." Something flickered across his face when he said it, a heat that was too big for the moment, as though she had brushed up against a nerve she couldn't see. Naomi noticed it without understanding it. She only knew that a simple thing, a few honest questions about waste she had raised months ago, had lodged in this man like a splinter, and that he was looking at her now as if she were dangerous. And there it was, the choice laid at her feet on a restaurant floor. She could pick up the other half of the sandwich walk out that door and carry the rest of it home to Jaden, who was waiting, who had waited before, and who would understand because he always understood. No one would fault her. It was her dinner. It was her son. It was her right. Or she could stay. She could stand her ground in a room that had already decided the old man did not matter, and by standing, insist that he did. It would cost her. She could feel that it would cost her in the way Marcus was looking at her, in the way the whole evening had turned. Naomi looked at the old man who had not said a word in his own defense, who had the tired dignity of someone long accustomed to being told to move along. And she thought of her husband, and of all the times she had wished someone had simply stood beside her when the world was busy walking past. She stayed. "He can finish eating first," she said quietly, and she did not move. Marcus stared at her as though she had struck him. The room held its breath, and near the service station, the young woman named Emily set down her warm pitcher of water, her hands unsteady, something waking in her that she did not yet have the courage to name. There are moments when what a person needs most is not a full meal or a fixed problem or even a kind word. Sometimes the deepest hunger is simply to be treated for one honest minute as a human being who counts. Naomi had almost nothing to give that night. But she gave the one thing that costs the most and shows on no receipt, and in doing so, she set in motion a reckoning that none of them, least of all the man in the old coat, could yet see coming. The old man finished eating. That was the part Marcus could not forgive. He stood by the counter with the half sandwich Naomi had given him, taking his time, and every unhurried bite was its own small rebellion against a manager who had ordered him gone. Daniel ate slowly on purpose. He wanted to watch the room a while longer. He wanted to see who Marcus became when a nobody refused to disappear on command. What he saw was a man whose anger ran far deeper than the moment deserved, and that told him something. Because Marcus was not simply cruel. Cruelty alone would have been almost simple. What Daniel was watching, though he could not yet name the shape of it, was a man protecting a secret. For a year, the trash reports from this dining room had read too beautifully, and there was a reason. Marcus had been skimming. The food he logged as spoiled, as ruined, as thrown away, was not always thrown away at all. Much of it left through the back door in boxes and became cash in his pocket, sold quietly to people who asked no questions, while the paperwork called it loss. It was a clean little theft, clean, as long as no one looked too hard at what actually reached the dumpster. And Naomi looked. That was her whole crime. She had a habit of noticing what was wasted because waste offended her in a world where her own son waited on a half a sandwich. Months back, she had raised it gently more than once, asking why so much good food was written off when there were hungry men sleeping in the alley behind them. She had meant it as concern. Marcus had heard it as a footstep near a door he needed to keep shut. To him, She was not a co-worker with a soft heart. She was the one person in the building who was, without even knowing it, counting in the direction of the truth. So when she stood her ground for a stranger, something in Marcus decided she had become a threat he could no longer afford. "You want to play the saint?" he said to her loud enough that the nearest tables went quiet. "Let's talk about it in front of everybody. Big heart, Naomi, real big heart. Can't pay your own rent, can't keep your own lights on, raising that boy in whatever hole you crawl home to, and here you are running a soup kitchen on my floor." He shook his head with a showman's disgust. "Some people can barely take care of their own kid and still want a medal for feeding trash." The word kid did something to Naomi's face, a brief tightening she controlled at once. She did not answer him. Answering was what he wanted. Daniel watched all of it, and he set each thing he saw beside the reports he had trusted for so long. The gap between the two was enormous. On paper, this was one of his best-run rooms, a model of discipline and low waste. In the flesh, it was a place where a man humiliated a widow for the sin of feeding the hungry, and where good food had a way of vanishing before it ever reached the customers whose names filled those glowing numbers. The paperwork had been smiling at him for a year. Now he was standing inside the lie it told. Marcus, though, wanted a period at the end of his sentence. He wanted her to know exactly where she stood. So he reached out, took the paper bag still sitting on the counter, the bag holding the other half of the sandwich meant for Jaden, and he turned it over, letting the food fall to the floor at her feet. "There," he said. "Now clean it up. That's what you're for." The room seemed to tilt on that single small act. It was the kind of thing that decides a story, though no one in that dining room knew yet that a story was being decided. Naomi had every right to come apart. Somewhere under her ribs, the anger was there, hot and full and entirely earned. Anyone would have understood if she had let it out, if she had told this man exactly what he was in front of every customer he was performing for. Instead, she knelt. She knelt on the hard floor of the restaurant and gathered the pieces of the sandwich, the crispy part her son had asked for that very morning, now scattered and ruined. She wiped the spot clean with a napkin, unhurried her back straight, as though the floor deserved better than to be left a mess even now. Then she took out her phone, stepped just far enough away to keep her voice private, and called home. "Hey, baby," she said softly, and whatever was breaking in her did not reach her voice. I know. Something happened at work, so dinner's gonna be a little late tonight. Can you hang on for Mama just a little longer?" Whatever Jaden said on the other end made her close her eyes for the length of a breath. "That's my good man. I'll be home soon. I love you more." Daniel stood very still, the last of the bread forgotten in his hand. He understood, watching her kneel, that he had been wrong about something he had built his whole life around. He had believed that strength came from having enough, that a person who lacked could not afford to be generous. That kindness was a thing you purchased once your own accounts were safe. But here was a woman with nothing, robbed even of the little she had, and she had not let it turn her cruel. Her strength did not come from having much. It came from refusing even now to let the world make her small enough to stop caring. That was a kind of wealth that had never once appeared on any report he had ever read, and it cracked something open in him that would not close again. Perhaps it is only those who have gone without who truly understand what it costs to make sure another person does not feel abandoned. The ones who have been left standing in the cold learn better than anyone the exact weight of a hand that reaches back. Naomi knew that weight. She had simply decided a long time ago that she would rather carry it than become someone who let others fall. She gathered the ruined food into the bag, tied it closed, told Marcus nothing at all, and walked out into the evening to go home to her son. Behind her, the old man in the worn coat left two out into the same night, his face unreadable. The day he had given himself was over. He had come to see one dining room for a single evening, and he had seen it. What he had not planned on was carrying the image of a kneeling woman home with him, or how it would refuse to let him sleep. That was the end of the day. Daniel walked among his own people as a stranger. But it was only the beginning of what happened to Naomi, and the days that followed did not stay quiet, because Marcus was not a man who let a threat walk out a door. In the days after, while Naomi went back to cleaning offices in the morning and worrying over the past due notice on her refrigerator, he was busy with the security footage from the back of the restaurant. He was not a fool. He knew Naomi's questions about waste sat too close to the thing he was hiding, and he knew that a woman who noticed things was a woman who sooner or later might be believed. So he decided to make certain that no one would ever believe her again. The cameras had caught her routine many times over, but a camera only shows what someone chooses to keep. Marcus found an evening when she carried a bag of food out the back door, the same quiet thing she did most nights, and he kept only that. He cut away everything before it and everything after every second that showed the food was bound for trash, every frame of the men in the alley, all of it gone. What remained was 10 clean seconds of an employee walking company food out the back of the building, and to a stranger's eye, it looked exactly like theft. He did more than keep it. He shared it. The clip went to the district office with a note about an employee stealing inventory, and then, because ruin travels fastest when it is entertaining, it found its way online. Someone attached her name. Someone else attached the word she now wore like a brand: thief. It did not matter that it was a lie. A lie with video moves faster than a truth with none. Naomi learned how fast when she was suspended pending an investigation, her income cut to the single morning job that had never been enough on its own. She learned it again scrolling through comments from people who had never met her, strangers, certain of her guilt, calling her exactly the thing Marcus had needed them to call her. And she learned it in the cruelest place of all, in her own home, when Jaden came back from school quiet and would not look at her, and finally asked in the small voice of a child who has been laughed at whether it was true that his mama took things that weren't hers. That was the one that nearly broke her. She sat her son down and told him the truth plainly, and she watched him decide whether to believe her, and she understood that a lie had reached into her home and put a crack between her and the only person she had left. The rent notice on the refrigerator was joined by another sharper one, and the building manager stopped being polite about it. There was one person who knew with certainty that the clip was a lie, and her name was Emily. She had been there the night it all started. She knew exactly what that backdoor footage left out, because she had seen the truth of Naomi's kindness with her own eyes. But Emily was a month into a job she badly needed, and Marcus was the man who signed off on whether she kept it, and every time she opened her mouth to say something, the fear closed it again. She said nothing, and the saying nothing sat in her chest and grew heavier by the day, a small betrayal she carried alongside her paychecks. For a moment, it seemed the ground might steady under Naomi's feet. She found another job, or thought she had a lead on waitressing across town where no one knew her. She sat across from a manager who liked her, who nodded through the interview, who said the words that sounded like a door opening. She let herself feel it, that thin, bright thing she had trained herself not to feel. Hope. She went home and almost told Jaden they were going to be all right. Then the man called back, and his voice had changed. He had looked her up. He had found the clip. He was sorry, he said, in the tone people use when they are not sorry so much as relieved to be rid of a problem, but he couldn't bring that into his restaurant. The door that had opened swung shut, and it shut harder than if it had never opened at all, because now she knew exactly what she had lost. That was when Naomi stopped reaching. She sat at her kitchen table one night after Jaden had finally fallen asleep. The past due notices spread in front of her like a hand of cards she could not win, and she did the math one more time, and the math said what it always said. There was not enough. There would not be enough. She had held on with everything she had, and everything she had was not going to be sufficient, and no one was coming. No one had ever come. She had known that for 2 years, and she had been a fool for one evening to forget it. She began quietly to give up. She pulled a suitcase from the closet. She thought about her mother's house 3 states away, about swallowing her pride and going back, about pulling Jaden out of the school where the other children whispered. She thought about turning off her phone so the calls from the landlord would stop. This, she told herself, was simply what the world had been trying to teach her all along. You give people the last thing you have, and the world takes even that, and it turns your own kindness into the weapon it beats you with. She had reached out her hand once to a hungry stranger. And look what it had cost her. She did not know that the hungry stranger had a name that was on the building. She did not know that he had gone home that night unable to forget her, or that he had spent the days since doing something very quiet and very deliberate. Because Daniel Whitmore did not need to investigate to learn the truth. He already knew it. He had stood 10 feet away and watched every second of it happen. Watched Naomi break her own dinner in half. Watched Marcus dump the rest on the floor. Watched a good woman kneel and clean it up and call her son to say she'd be late. No camera could tell him anything his own eyes had not already recorded. What he needed was not the truth. What he needed was proof, the kind that could not be cut, spun, or denied, the kind that could stand up next to Marcus's lie and destroy it. So, while Naomi packed a suitcase and gave up on being saved, Daniel was gathering the original security footage. All of it, every uncut minute, and the inventory records and the delivery logs and the quiet trail of numbers that never quite added up. He was building something Marcus could not talk his way out of. He was, without her knowing it, assembling the answer to a lie she did not even know had a solution. There are stretches of a life that feel like nothing but loss, when every day removes one more thing until it seems there will be nothing left to take. And yet it is exactly in those stretches, stripped of everything that lets a person hide, that the truest measure of who they are becomes visible at last. Naomi, in the worst weeks of her life, had knelt on a floor rather than let a stranger go hungry, and had told her son the truth rather than a comforting lie, and had kept her dignity when it was the only thing left to keep. She could not see it, but someone had. And he was almost ready. The suitcase was half full when Daniel Whitmore ran out of time. He had spent those quiet days building something Marcus could never talk his way around, and he had nearly finished. The uncut footage was his. The inventory records were his. The delivery logs, the vendor names, the whole crooked little trail of numbers that never reconciled all of it, sat ready in a folder that could end a man. He had assumed he would move at his own pace the way he moved through everything deliberate and sure. He had assumed wrong on 2 counts, and both nearly cost him everything. The first was Marcus, who had not been idle either. A man protecting a secret develops a certain instinct for danger, and Marcus had begun to feel the floor shifting under him, questions from the district office arriving a shade too specific, and audit requests that had not gone through him first. So he did what cornered men with the right friends do. He went to someone above him. There was a regional vice president named Richard Calloway, a smooth and careful man who had, for a share he never wrote down anywhere, spent a year making sure certain waste reports were approved without a second glance. Calloway had his own reasons to keep the door shut, and he had something more dangerous than power over Marcus. He had the ear of the board. When Marcus came to him pale and talking fast, Calloway understood at once that his own neck was on the line, and he moved to protect it. He could not overrule the man whose name was on the building, but he did not have to. He went quietly to certain members of the board of directors, the handful of people a chief executive still answers to. And he told them a careful story that Daniel had grown erratic, that he was chasing a personal obsession over a single disgruntled employee, that a public spectacle over one suspended waitress would embarrass the company and rattle investors. Best to keep it internal. Best to let the theft case close on its own terms, let the woman take the fall, and let the numbers stay beautiful. He was not fighting the CEO head-on. He was whispering to the only people with the standing to slow the CEO down. For a day and a half it worked. Daniel felt it happening, felt his own machine turning against the truth. Felt board members he had known for years growing suddenly cautious, suggesting he wait, suggesting he not make this so public. The evidence he had gathered was being gently steered toward a drawer that would never open again. Power was closing ranks around power, and even the man at the top of it could feel how easily a story could be smothered by people who profited from silence. The second thing Daniel had assumed wrong was that Naomi would still be there when he was ready. She would not be. By the time he understood how close he was to losing control of the whole thing, she had already stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't know. She had already told her landlord she would be gone by the end of the week. The suitcase was open on her bed. This was the darkest hour of the entire story, and it fell in two places at once. The man with the proof was being maneuvered into silence by his own board, and the woman who needed saving had stopped believing that anyone would come. So Daniel did something no report had ever taught him to do. He stopped managing and started fighting. He would not let the matter be settled in a quiet room by cautious men. He called a full meeting, put it on the record, invited the communications team, and the very people Calloway had been whispering to, and made certain that whatever happened would happen where it could not be buried afterward. If the board wanted to look away, they would have to do it with the truth sitting in front of them and the cameras waiting outside. And then, because none of it would mean anything without her, he went to find Naomi himself. He found her address in the very employment records Calloway had wanted sealed. He drove to a tired building on the edge of the city and climbed the stairs and knocked on a door behind which a woman was folding a child's shirts into a suitcase and telling herself it was for the best. When Naomi opened the door, she did not recognize him at first. The worn coat was gone. In its place stood a man in a plain dark suit, and it took her a long moment to find the stranger from the restaurant inside this composed and unmistakably important person on her landing. "You," she said, and her hand tightened on the edge of the door. "You're the man I—" The rest of it would not come, because the rest of it made no sense. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," he told her. "I own the company you work for, and I owe you an explanation, and a great deal more than that." She heard the name and felt the ground shift the whole evening in the restaurant, rearranging itself into a shape she did not like. "You were pretending?" she said slowly, and something hardened in her voice. "That whole time. You were testing us, testing me." "I was testing the people I trusted to run my restaurants," he said. "You weren't one of the ones I came to test. You were the only thing I found worth keeping." Here was the moment that the whole story had been moving toward, though neither of them announced it. Because standing in her doorway, Naomi faced a choice far harder than the one she had faced in the restaurant. That night, she had risked her dinner. Now she was being asked to risk something she guarded far more carefully than food. She was being asked to hope again, to let someone stand beside her, to set down after 2 years the wall she had built one. I've got it at a time, and to admit that she could not fix this alone, and to let a man she had every reason to distrust help carry it. Everything in her wanted to close the door. Hoping had cost her. She had reached out once, and the world had turned her open hand into the thing it beat her with. To reach again felt like walking back toward the same fire. "I can't keep getting knocked down," she said, and for the first time, her voice was not steady. "I've got a little boy in there who thinks his mother's a thief, because that's what the whole world told him. I reached out one time, and it took everything I had. Why would I do that again? Because this time," Daniel said, "you won't be reaching alone. You reached for me when it cost you everything and you got nothing back. Let me be the one who reaches back." He held her gaze. "Come and tell the truth. Not by yourself. With me standing next to you. I am asking you to trust that just once, kindness comes back around." For a long moment she looked at him, and then she looked over her shoulder at the half-packed suitcase, at the life she had already begun to fold up and carry away. And Naomi Brooks made the choice that changed her, not the choice to be kind, because she had always been kind, but the choice to believe she was worth being fought for. She closed the suitcase, not to leave, to put it away. "Let me get Jaden a sitter," she said, "and then I'll come tell them exactly what happened." The meeting Daniel called was not on any schedule. He summoned it, and because it was his name on the door, they came, Marcus among them, and Richard Calloway, smooth and certain, seated near the head of the table beside the board members he had spent a day and a half quietly courting. There were senior executives, and there were people from the company's communications team, and there was sitting quietly along the wall a young woman named Emily, whom no one had thought to keep away because no one imagined she mattered. Calloway opened smoothly, already steering, speaking as much to the board as to the room. "I think we all understand this is a delicate personnel situation," he began. "An employee took inventory. It was captured on camera, and unfortunately it's gotten some attention online. I'd recommend we close this quickly and quietly before it does the company any real harm." "Play the footage," Daniel said. A screen at the end of the room lit up, and on it ran the clip the whole city had already seen, 10 clean seconds of Naomi carrying a bag of food out the back door, the clip that had cost her a job and a home, and nearly her son's faith in her. "That's the evidence," Calloway said, spreading his hands toward the board. "I don't see what more there is to discuss." "That's a piece of the evidence," Daniel corrected. "Cut from a much longer piece. Play the original." The screen changed, and now the same scene ran but whole. The alley behind the restaurant, the men who slept there, the trays of food already bound for the trash, logged as spoiled. Naomi wrapping what was still good and carrying it out to people who had nothing exactly as she had done, 100 times exactly as the man who was her boss had ordered her 100 times to stop. There was no theft anywhere in it. There was only a woman feeding the hungry with food the company had already thrown away. The room was very quiet. Marcus had gone the color of ash. "Now," Daniel said, and set a thick folder on the table. "Let's talk about where the food that wasn't in the trash actually went." He opened it. He laid out the inventory records and the delivery logs and the long trail of numbers, and he walked them through it plainly how much good food had been marked as waste, how little of it had ever reached a dumpster where the rest had gone, and how it had turned into cash in Marcus Denton's pocket. And then he turned a page and he named the man who had signed off on every falsified report for a year without once looking the man who a day and a half ago had gone whispering to this very board to keep this very meeting from happening. Richard. Daniel said, "You approved all of it. And when it started to unravel, you went around me to the board and tried to bury it and let a widow take the fall. That's the part I can't forgive." Calloway's smooth expression finally cracked, and the excuses that came out of him were the sound of a man realizing there was no drawer deep enough to hide in, and no board member willing to reach for it now that the truth was lit up on the wall. It was then that a small voice spoke from along the wall, unsteady but clear, and every head turned toward the young woman who had found her courage a month too late and just in time. "I was there," Emily said, standing because her legs would not let her stay seated. "The night it all started. I saw everything the man she gave the sandwich to, all of it. And I knew the video going around was a lie because I watched what really happened with my own eyes." She looked at Marcus, and then made herself look away from him because she was done being afraid of him. "He told me to keep my mouth shut. I did, and I've been ashamed of it every day since. Naomi Brooks never stole anything. She's the best person in that building." And Naomi, who had come after all, who had not run, sat at that table with her head up and did not have to defend herself, because for the first time the truth had arrived with enough people behind it that she did not have to carry it alone. When the worst of it was over, when Calloway had been walked out and Marcus sat collapsed in his chair, Daniel did something no one expected. He told them why. "Some of you have heard me say that kindness is a luxury," he said, "that we run on figures, not feelings. I believed that for a long time. I want to tell you where I actually come from because I've spent 30 years making very sure no one knew." The room stilled in a different way now, and he let it. "A long time ago, before any of this, before there was a name on any building, I was a young man with nothing. No home, no money, cold in a way you don't forget. And one night outside a diner I couldn't afford to walk into, a stranger came out, a person who did not have much either, and broke what little food they had in half and gave me part of it. Didn't ask my name, didn't want anything for it. Just decided I was worth being seen. His voice held steady, but only just. I built all of this to be worth that. And somewhere along the way I turned into a man who stands in a warm room full of food and calls kindness a luxury. I forgot. And then a woman I'd never met broke her son's dinner in half and handed it to a stranger she thought had nothing, and reminded me of the only thing I ever actually knew that was worth knowing. That was the answer at last to the question the whole thing had begun with. Why does a person with almost nothing still choose to share? Because someone had once shared with him, and it had made a life. Because kindness is not what you have left over after you have taken care of yourself. It is the thing that decides who you are when you have almost nothing left at all. After that, the decisions came quickly and they came clean. Marcus Denton was fired, and his falsified records and the theft behind them were handed to the company's lawyers to carry wherever the law took them. Richard Calloway followed him out the same day. Daniel stood in front of the cameras that had been so eager to brand Naomi a thief and told them plainly that they had been lied to, that the woman they had convicted was innocent, and that the company owed her a public apology it now intended to pay in full. Her job was restored, and her back pay with it, and the debts that had piled up in her absence were quietly cleared. But Daniel did more than repair what had been broken, because repair was not enough for a man who had finally remembered what he owed the world. He announced a program that would run through every restaurant the company owned, and he called it Shared Meal. In each dining room, a portion of good food that would once have been thrown away or worse stolen would instead be set aside to feed anyone who came hungry, no questions asked, no one made to feel they did not count. And he asked Naomi Brooks to lead it. "I can't teach this," he told her simply when she stared at him as though he had lost his mind. "I've got 100 managers I could send to 100 courses, and not one of them would learn what you did on that floor. You already know the thing the whole company forgot, so teach us." 6 months later, the sunflower magnet still held things to Naomi's refrigerator, but the past due notice was long gone, and in its place was a child's drawing of 2 stick figures at a dinner table, a big one and a small one, both of them smiling. Jaden got his chicken sandwiches, now the ones with the crispy part, and he got them on ordinary nights when nothing special was happening, which was its own kind of miracle. He no longer came home from school quiet. And his mother was different too, in a way that was harder to see but ran deeper than any of it. She still gave the way she had always given, but she had stopped saying, "I've got it," as a way of keeping the world at arm's length. She had learned late and at great cost that letting someone stand beside her did not make her weak, and that she had been worth fighting for all along. In every restaurant, the company owned a corner was set with a few tables, warm and clean, and open to anyone who walked in with nothing. And one afternoon, in the very dining room where all of it had started, one of the men who used to sleep in the alley out back, one of the men Naomi had quietly fed with food bound for the trash, walked in through the front door instead of being chased from it, and sat down, and was served a hot meal by someone who called him sir and meant it. The kindness of one woman on one hard night had grown into something that reached a stranger she would never even know she had helped. At the company's headquarters in the lobby where the important people passed every morning, a single framed photograph hung on the wall. It was not of Daniel. It was a picture of half a loaf of bread broken clean in 2, and beneath it a line about the night the company remembered what it was for. Daniel Whitmore had built an empire on the belief that everything that mattered could be counted. In the end, the thing that saved it could not be counted at all. It was only the ordinary kindness of an ordinary mother who had almost nothing and gave anyway. Sometimes the thing that leaves the longest mark is not what we manage to hold on to, but how we choose to treat a stranger in the moment they need us most.